when I finally became a champion, my father made the joke that he wants to get a badge for everybody that says I beat David Mendelsohn because everyone beat me along the way. I just failed everything, every subject. I couldn't even pass a single grade. One of my tricks to make people not fight with me or not pick on me is I said, be careful, I'm Canadian champion. I hadn't even won a match yet at that point, not even one wrestling match. And that was the path that basically led me to visualization, to starting to realize that when I noticed that whatever I imagined would happen, would end up happening. It didn't matter what it was, even to the point of saying I imagined once getting to the finals of a really hard tournament and that I was going to lose in the final, but I was going to get to the final. And it happened, but then I lost in the final. And I said to myself, why did I lose in the final? I beat everybody else. I even beat guys that were better than the guy I faced in the final. Why did I make it all the way there and then lose? Because I visualized that. I said, if you want to win, you have to become stupid. Like a bull, he told me, you have to be like a bull. But I took his message to heart and I said, how can I become like a bull?
Hi, I'm Gilad, and this is The Possible, where I have conversations with ethical leaders to provide tangible wisdom for a good life. It is an absolute pleasure to have my dear friend, David Mendelsohn, who is someone who has mentored me since I was 18 years old, world medalist wrestler, a linguist, winner of one of Canada's most prestigious academic awards, and a really great person. David, it is an honor to have you with us.
Thank you, Gilad. Wonderful to have this conversation with you, and I look forward to seeing what unfolds.
Absolutely. And I'd say that you have touched me personally in such deep ways, from showing me how doing handstands would literally transform my worldview to thinking through visualization and creating your own life journey by seeing it in your head first and then actually going to live it. So I want to start with your foundation, thinking about the household that you grew up in. How did, in your very religious household, you end up as a medalist wrestler and a PhD and also, amazing violinists in the family? Like, what was going on in the household?
First of all, let me think there. I think we have to, I guess, elaborate. It's a Orthodox Jewish house I was brought up in, and from nursery school to kindergarten to grades, I guess 4. So it was Yiddish speaking, although home we spoke English because my family is from Tennessee. I was born and raised in Montreal, Canada, and I guess the fault or the credit, both in equal amounts, go with my father, who was an Orthodox devout Jew and also probably the most open-minded person I've ever met. In terms of everything, gender, religion, skin color, it didn't matter what it was. Everything was interesting and to be respected, discussed, fascinating. And he would bring into our house anybody that he found brought an important conversation, something to discuss, to understand another point of view. So in many ways, when I was very young, I guess around 9 or 10, and I suddenly decided that I didn't want to be religious anymore. I didn't want to be in yeshiva anymore. People thought that this was I guess remarkable from the sense of, how does a 9-10-year-old boy know that they don't want something, and and then I went on strike. I refused to go until they sent me to a regular school, public school. So and again, the fault or the credit lies with my father, who turned me into a reader at a very young age. So not only were we well versed in the Torah and all the commentaries and all such things, my dad was also a English literature professor, so he would read,
I see a few books in the background.
Yeah, he would read books to me at a very young age. Things like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the Narnia series. He would read I'm trying to think, not The Hobbit, that I read on my own, but The Wizard of Oz, and really heavy books, like heavy hitting books like the Odyssey, the Aeneid. But he didn't really care what we read. He just thought it was interesting to interact, and he had this idea that anybody could deal with any subject matter that their brain was ready to deal with, to grapple with. And if they weren't ready to, their brain wouldn't be able to grapple with it, and it didn't matter. And eventually you'd come back to it. And that mindset is kind of he didn't do it, maybe he did it consciously or subconsciously, but he was a remarkable human. And that led me to explore on my own. And when one day, when my father introduced his Coptic friends to my world, and Muslim friends, other types of Christian friends, different colors, I suddenly one day realized that my father is treating all these people with such respect, and he believes that they're all good people. I once asked him if they're all going to heaven. My father said, anybody goes to heaven who's good. That was his answer. Why are we practicing any specific religion? And I think suddenly at that point, I just suddenly realized that it wasn't for me. I already knew it beforehand, kind of like I always sensed it, and I started to break away and be curious about everything. So my curiosity was, I'm not blaming him, I'm not giving him credit, but there was definitely an influence from there as well.
Which
And
is a
then when I
funny
went,
path because it could have
yeah,
gone the other way of saying, oh, wow, I admire how he lives. I want to copy how he lives and keep doing that. Like, so it's an
right.
interesting thing of like, it
Yeah,
could go both ways.
absolutely. No, I was definitely, so I'm the oldest of three. My dad raised us as a single father. And they had a very bitter divorce when I was about 8 years old, my parents, and he got custody, so he raised us. But what I was going to say was that I realized that I was always very challenged authority. I still do. I have the twin sides of being very respectful and loving people. I think all people equally, and also not trusting anybody in terms of that they have the authority over me in any kind of way to decide something. So I always had that dual nature. So I challenged my father, didn't believe that his way was necessarily the right way. And my little brother, who was also both my brothers are incredible, just incredible humans. He found that it was easiest just to do whatever my father said, and we both ended up on wonderful paths. And it wasn't what we didn't end up being violinists; we were clarinetists. So we both. So when I left the regular yeshiva and I went to a regular school, it wasn't a typical public school. It was a school for the arts. So we had to have some kind of gift for the arts. You had to interview to get in, and so I was. I guess they initially brought me in as a reader, and then and so I did drama. We had to do everything: choir, music, arts, everything. But I was a freak. I had like a peyot, kippah was, and I thought I was the only Jewish person there. So and nobody spoke to me, aside from the Mohawk kids who came from the nearby reservation, and they kind of liked me because I was a bit scrappy. I got stuck on a wrestling team very quickly because I was always getting in fights.
You're like, I better learn how to do this well.
What's that? Sorry?
I better learn how to do this well.
Exactly. Yeah, I had to. And that's actually leads to visualization in some ways. One of my tricks to make people not fight with me, not pick on me, is I said, be careful, I'm Canadian champion. I hadn't even won a match yet at that point. Not even one wrestling match.
You're like 12 or
13 or so. Yeah. 12, 13. We are right. 12. This is before my bar mitzvah. So yeah, so I guess some part of my brain registered that if I said I'm Canadian champion, maybe I should become one. And I still hadn't won a match. It took me a long time. Everyone kept, this leads into your other question you want to talk to me later about visualization. So on my wrestling team, it so happened that I was lucky enough to land that my very first and only wrestling coach ended up being the Canada's Olympic coach, who was considered one of the greatest wrestlers and technicians in the world. So just by pure luck, I landed on one of the best coaches in the world. And I frustrated him a lot because I was on the team. I could beat most of the kids in practices eventually after years and years of losing to everybody because these were the national team members of Canada. So it's the it's the equivalent of taking a kid like with no, let's see, in skating, no ability at all, and putting him in a major league skating team.
Why did you want this so badly, though? That like you keep losing for years.
I just asked my father to find me a wrestling team, and it was fun for me. I had people talk to me. They paid attention to me. They were sort of nice to me. So it was almost like having friends, although they all treated me like a little kid. And then I think at some point saying I was the Canadian champion made me realize that I should try and become the Canadian champion. So without realizing it, I suddenly decided to be the best. And I had to figure out how to go from losing to everybody to becoming the best. And that was the path that basically led me to visualization, to starting to realize that when I noticed that whatever I imagined would happen, would end up happening. It didn't matter what it was, even to the point of saying I imagined once getting to the finals of a really hard tournament and that I was going to lose in the final, but I was going to get to the final. And it happened, but then I lost in the final. And I said to myself, why did I lose in the final? I beat everybody else. I even beat guys that were better than the guy I faced in the final. Why did I make it all the way there and then lose? Because I visualized that.
And that visualization, was that a moment of visualization, or you would spend like 3 hours in the morning like visualizing how things would go?
All the time I'd see how the different matches would happen. I'd see myself not giving up any points. I'd see myself achieving my moves, and one by one, and I noticed that no matter what happened, it would work out that way. And then of course, when I ended up making the national team, our coach, actually we had a sports psychologist, and spoke with us, and I learned that what I was doing was actually called visualization, and he thought it was remarkable that I'd stumbled on this on my own. And that's worked with me for everything. In school, when I went to regular school, I didn't touch on this. I was a good Talmud Chacham. In yeshiva, I was a very good student. I was winning, like, a lot of these books are prizes I won in yeshiva as a little kid, as a little 7-year-old, 8-year-old. And then when they put me in regular school, I just failed every subject. I couldn't even pass a single grade. I wasn't used to math. You get thrown into a whole world you don't know anything about. You have to deal with a shift in language from a regular ultra-religious school to a place where you spoke French and English in Quebec, Montreal, Quebec. and kids that don't want to have anything to do with you because you're freaky and you're different. And my house, however you want it, growing up in the household I did, I was different.
How long did it take for you to not look visually different, where you said, okay, I kind of maybe want to fit in, so I'm gonna...
That's a different story. That took a while, but what happened was I ended up having, so I mentioned before the fact that we had a lot of Mohawks from the local reserve, Ganawagi, that wasn't far from my house. And they liked me. Like they liked that I fought. We were on the same wrestling team, and they just they found me funny. And they did things that were strange to me. Like they'd take bites of an apple and they'd offer me the bite of the apple. And I found it on one hand disgusting that they had a big chompy mouth, tooth-shaped bite in the apple. On the other hand, they were offering me friendship along with their germs. So I remember the first time taking a bite of it with kind of disgust, and then I realized these are my friends. And it was kind of it was all these little transitional moments that stick in my brain. And then I ended up having a girlfriend from the reserve. We didn't care they had a kippa. She used to pretend it was a frisbee and throw it. Thought it was very funny. They didn't care, basically. And I went to the reserve all the time. And when I finally cut off my peyote and took off my kippa, my father and I did have issues then. We went through about a year or two where we were having real difficulties, and I ended up spending most of my time on the reserve. With one of my best friends who was there, and I ended up really, without realizing it, really getting into the culture, picking up the language. That's the point when people started realizing I'm good with languages. I just sort of soaked up the language, the culture, and just kind of became one of the wild kids who were there.
What was that experience like? I mean, compared to being in a religious home and then...
Gilad, it was nothing different at all. It's easy to romanticize it or make it sound exotic, but that's the point that I realized, and this is really probably my ultimate message for everything I do traveling around the world, is that there's no difference in any group I've ever been. In every social setting in the yeshiva, there was the sensitive, soft-spoken one. There was the intellectual, passionate. There was the goof, the clown. Every type. There was the bully. The sharp-witted one who made fun of everything. Every type that we know, every archetype was present. And then I found it in Ganawagi in the Indian Reserve. I found it when I worked in a prison in South Africa for a while. Didn't matter where. And then I realized that I'm recognizing these people, the same percentage of assholes and wonderful people anywhere in the world. Same percentage of remarkable people. When you find the remarkable person, that incredible spark, they're also there. So in the ultimate ultra-Orthodox, Haredi, bearded, where you think you go there, if you're lucky enough to get in, you'll meet all those people. And then you realize that it really doesn't matter. There is no such thing as the right or wrong way. And it kind of, it's a wonderful thing to realize. And that was my message without even realizing that I kind of, and they all accepted me as I was at whatever stage of my life I was. So that was the point in my jock phase, where I was just kind of a fighter, a rough kid. I enjoyed the thing with girls. The one thing I was a bit different is I was a reader. But they just thought it was my quirk. I would read and read and read, and I was immersed in my books. And then they say, "Hey, David," and they throw my book away, and I'd go and do whatever I was supposed to do with them. So it was just it was a really interesting way to bridge into the regular world. So it could have gone either way, like what you said before. I could have ended up with no friends and been a total loner in my own world of books and everything, which I was immersed. I actually still have in my an agreement I had to make in grade 5 with the principal and my teachers that I had to stop reading so much. And if I agreed to start socializing and talking to other people, that I'd be allowed to read a bit more. So I stuck that in the back of my PhD diploma after I found the note and put it together just as a memory. But it didn't end up matter. I didn't listen to it at all. I still read just as much as ever, and I made friends just fine eventually everywhere. It never really mattered. So,
do you think that an aspect of being different, you both were different in the school, was a unifying component, or you just happened to connect more with your friends from the Mohawk tribe?
No, I think the point at which every human, if you get to the point where you can laugh at yourself, I think the world opens up. And I was very lucky that I stumbled upon that on my own. No, not on my own. There was people that said, David, you're too serious. You have to learn to laugh at yourself. So people did say that to me. Older people, friends of my dad's children, I remember, who was from some. My father had this really rough and tumble professor friend who was kind of an Ernest Hemingway type, with a son who's called Petey. They were all into carpentry and really men. And he stayed at our house. They were in Connecticut. They stayed at our house in Montreal for a while. And the son kept telling me, a big burly guy kept saying, David, you have to learn to laugh at yourself. You take yourself way too seriously. So I guess that helped me too.
Do you feel like your dad, in wanting you to constantly learn and to grow, did he also want you to pursue greatness in the way that you ended up doing, or was that more self-driven? He
was very gentle. He didn't really, he let us feel that we were, that he supported whatever we would do. He used to say, if you're a garbage man, just be the best garbage man that you personally can be. But he himself, of course, went to Harvard. He was he himself was very, he was driven, but he was driven, I think, in the way that a lot of Jewish American people at that period of time were driven, by those parents. And I think he deliberately left that world to bring us up in a world where we wouldn't have that kind of pressure. He would have been perfectly happy to be stayed in yeshiva and just stayed in yeshiva our whole life. I think of that.
Interesting. But then you ended up choosing the pressure of championship. And
yeah, that was, yeah, exactly.
It's kind of an interesting thing. Could you speak to more of that journey and rising through almost to the Olympics? Like, what happened there? How did you feel after? How do you feel when you win the match that says, okay, I can now say I'm really a champion? And did you say, what's next? Like, what was that process of getting to the highest levels like?
Well, it was tricky. Like I touched on the fact earlier that I lost a lot. When I finally became a champion, my father made the joke that he wants to get a badge for everybody that says I beat David Mendelsohn because everyone beat me along the way before. So he said everyone beat you, so they could all wear a badge and say it, because I went through a huge speed where no one could beat me for the longest time. I dominated. So my father thought that was very funny. But the story of that journey is actually kind of important, I think, and maybe helpful. So I kind of again it's remarkable. I like that this is turning into a session about my father. Mm-hmm. So there was a young man about 17 years old in Ottawa. His name was Faisal. He came from India when he was about 7 years old. His father is considered one of the greatest Urdu poets alive today. And they came to Canada and moved to Ottawa. And Faisal ended up being a great wrestler. So he was already a Canadian junior champion in Ottawa, but he wanted to train with the best coach in Canada. Maybe the best in the world, my coach, Victor Zilberman in Montreal. So they call Victor Zilberman and they say, we'd like to send our son from Ottawa to Montreal. It's about a 2-hour drive to train with you. And we'd like him to stay with a Muslim family if possible, because we're a devout Muslim family. And my father and Victor was like, no, we don't have Muslims, but we do have an Orthodox Jewish family. Would you be interested in meeting them? And then one day I come home from school and I see this couch filled with people who look like they're from India. One was wearing, I think it looked like a sari. It wasn't a sari, but it's what Muslim Indian women wear. It looks similar. It's a very colorful, beautiful outfit. They're all sitting there. My father points to one of them and says, "This is Faisal. He's moving in with you." And Faisal moved in with me. He lived in my room with me for a couple of years. We became, until today, like best friends. His children, who call me Uncle David, and they really think I'm their uncle. It's not just honorific. They visited me in Germany. They visited us in Israel, which for people from India, Muslims from India or Pakistan is huge. It changed both of our lives forever. But Faisal loved me, so I used to sit up all night and just tell him my dreams. He's 4 years older than me. All the things I wanted to do. And he'd say, "That's great, David. Tell me more of your dreams." And I'd sing him songs. He'd say, "David, sing me another song."
Can we hear one?
I also used to go to his house. They'd let me go to his house in Ottawa, where my father didn't know that I was eating not kosher food as well. And I was watching Bollywood movies all night long, dancing with them. I picked up Urdu, by the way. That's why when you're in India, you might have noticed I could speak Hindi. So I picked up a lot of that as well, and the culture. But Faisal was interested in the fact he was always winning his competitions. He was a lighter weight class than me, an older division, but he always won, and I always lost. And then one day he said to me, "I'm going to take you to visit my uncle in Ottawa. He doesn't like Jews, but I think he can help you." So we drove to Ottawa, and the next day he brought me to his uncle's house. It was a crazy house of a bachelor who's weird, like canaries flying around the house, a bit musty smelling, old articles and books everywhere, kind of dark, and has that kind of musty bachelor smell to it. And he just watched me for a while, talked to me, and Faisal didn't seem to be paying attention to me. And he said, and then one time he looks at me, he goes, "David, your problem is you think too much." And I'm like, "What?" He goes, "Yes, you read books, and you want to know why you should be the one to win. What makes you special? He was right. I don't know how he knew it. He said, if you want to win, you have to become stupid, like a bull." He told me you have to be like a bull. So he said, "I'm giving you like a doctor, a receipt, a prescription. You have 6 months where you can't read books anymore." So I didn't stop reading, but I took his message to heart, and I said, "How can I become like a bull?